Hello, everybody. This is not one of my regular updates on the markets and the global economy, but rather I will try to give my perspective on something that everybody in the marketplace is talking about right now. And it's not the markets. It's not trade sanctions or tariffs or protectionism or Donald Trump's latest tweet. Um, it's the World Cup in Russia, in football, of course, or as the Americans call it, soccer. But yeah, Denmark played today. I took a couple of hours off to watch Denmark Australia. The match ended in a 1-1 draw. Denmark was the favorite ahead of the match, and of course, we in Denmark are hugely disappointed that we didn't win. And what is now being debated is why Australia got awarded a penalty kick after the so-called VAR kicked in. The VAR is the virtual assistance referee. So you have 5 guys sitting in a location, I think in Moscow, watching each match, and essentially are in real-time contact with the referee on the field. This is very much as we see in for example, American football, that you have cameras observing the match, like a high-tech version of the referee. This is a very new invention in football, in the sense that we don't have that in traditional football. The referee on the pitch is making the decisions in real time, and if you miss something or misjudge something, it's just too bad. That's how it always has been. But now we're actually trying to get in another party, a third party, sitting in a room somewhere, watching on their screens, and essentially second guessing, also in real time, what is happening. But they can wind back, so to speak, and watch the video and see what happens. And the idea about this is to remove the mistakes, to take out some of the mistakes being made, or if the referee on the pitch didn't see something, that they can assist the referee. And on paper, that sounds very well. And of course, anybody will say that my comments are biased by the fact that I'm Danish and Denmark drew today after such a decision was made. But the fact is, I'm very skeptical about that. I have long had an interest in sports and economics, and particularly in football and economics, and how those two things, how we can analyze both football in terms of how they played on the pitch, but also demand for football and such matters is a little bit of a pet interest of mine. And one of the things I always find very appealing is the fact that what makes football interesting is if there is competitive balance on the field. If there is the two teams match each other well, and there is uncertainty, therefore, about the outcome. Why is that important? Well, it's important in the sense that if we knew the outcome of every match beforehand, we wouldn't bother watching the match. We would like to have uncertainty. And uncertainty in football matches are created by different factors. And all of these factors are not down to the pure qualities of each team. If team A has $100 million to invest in their team's players, and team B has $10 to invest in that team, it's most likely that the team with most money will win. That's why we in American sports have a lot of efforts taken into creating competitive balances. And that's why also you might argue that in these sports you can take away some of the uncertainty, because in other ways you try to create competitive balance. One of the charming things about football is that when it's played by 11 players on each side, often random luck comes into play. It's hard to predict the outcome of any individual match. If Barcelona plays Real Madrid, it's pretty hard to forecast that. But if Brazil plays Luxembourg, Brazil will mostly win. If Brazil plays 100 matches against Luxembourg, we will know. And in the huge majority of those matches, Brazil will win. But every time they walk on the pitch, the individual next match, can be hard to predict. And that's clearly, if you look at it, the uncertainty about the outcome is rather significant. My former colleagues at Danske Bank actually just published a paper where they tried to predict who will win the World Cup. And what they did was they simulated a number of matches based on different, both economic and football fundamentals. And what they find is that they play the matches over and over again, so that 100,000 simulations, so-called Monte Carlo simulations, and then they can from that calculate based on their model what is the implied likelihood that any given country will win the World Cup. The favorite to win the World Cup is Brazil, but the likelihood that Brazil will win is, as far as I remember, only 17%. If you look at bookmakers' odds, it's about the same thing. So we can know who is the favorite to win the World Cup. That's Brazil. That's nearly always the case. Spain, Germany is up there, but not nearly as high. But note that 17% is not a high likelihood. So what makes football interesting is that we don't know who will win the match. Otherwise, we wouldn't bother watch the match. So what will the video assistant referee do? Well, he's taking away some of the chance. If the referee never makes mistakes, then that uncertainty disappears. For those who remember the famous match between Germany and England, or West Germany and England back in the 60s, when England became world champions on a goal which was still to this day debated whether the ball was in, or another England match against Argentina where Diego Maradona scores with his hand, it's the help of God of hand. Both of these things are contested and hugely debated, and certainly in the hands of Maradona, using his hand to score a goal, that's not fair. But it's still something that gives the game charm, and it's something we talked about today. Even when we chance there's a mistake made by the referee, that creates the drama and the uncertainty of the match. Obviously, you don't want that in each individual match, but you want to have uncertainty that something can go badly wrong, that the favorites for some reason lose. That is the charm of the game. So if you try to correct it, leveling the playing field completely, make sure that it doesn't rain. It never should rain. It should never snow. There should never be any wind on the field or the pitch. The referee should never make any mistakes. Then it's much more likely that the favorites will always win. You can say the uncertainties will help the underdogs, or at least makes it more likely that the underdogs will win for prime time. So my primary argument against the video assistance referee is actually that it reduces uncertainty in the outcome. I'm not sure that is actually what has happened in this World Cup, because something you also observe, and I observed it very much today in the Denmark-Australia match, is that when you change the rules, you will also change the behavior of the players. This is regulation theory from economics. If you change the regulation, the agents in the economy will change their behavior. So what we do now is it's very clear that what we've seen is that a lot more penalties are being awarded in this World Cup than in previous World Cups. Something like 67% of the matches we now have penalties. Earlier it was like 22% in historical World Cup. So a lot more penalties being awarded, and a lot of that because a third party, something watching a video screen, directly, indirectly would interfere with that. So what will that change? Well, that will change completely the behavior of how to defend. You don't want to have, it's much more likely that a penalty will be awarded somebody. Therefore, the defense will play likely in a much more boring way. Just shoot out the ball, get it out of your own home field. And it's much more likely that the attackers will try to get themselves into a situation where they are awarded a penalty. And in terms of the referee on the field, you take away responsibility. You say, okay, I cannot call this. I'll ask the guys in Moscow sitting and watching the video. So you get a completely different, much more risk-averse referee on the field. Or then it's also stop the match and stuff like that. So I think that one of the things about this is that you what you want to do is you want to the reason for introducing this is that you wanted to create fairness. That's obviously something that any spectator would like to see, a fair match. But if you, by doing that, first of all, makes the outcome uncertain and therefore by the match more boring, and secondly, potentially changes the way football is played, you might end up destroying the game. And yes, of course, as Dane, as I'm hugely disappointed with the outcome of the match today, you can say that actually created some uncertainty because Denmark was favorite to win and didn't. So you got something in here that created something different. But in general, I find it hard to see that there was something wrong with football in a way it was played 4 years ago at the World Cup in Brazil. So why change it? And I think it's very important to remember that the incentives in football, the way football is played, is given by the entire rule book. And if you change just small things in the rule book, you completely change the dynamics of the game, or at least potentially you change that. And I really fear that what you get here is that you get some really wrong incentive, both for the players and for the referees. We should allow referees to make mistakes. It's part of the charm of football. If they don't make mistakes, it becomes boring. Then Brazil will always win. And the Brazilians might be happy about that, but even the Brazilians don't want to watch a match where Brazil wins all the time. So, that was a non-market view. That was my view of football. That's not the business I'm in, but I love to talk about it. So I hope that you all have a very nice World Cup with or without VAR. And remember, for economists, VAR either means value at risk or vector autoregressive. Not really something with a referee. Have a nice day.